Hello there. Today is the 6th of June 2019. This is Paul Glumaz here in Seattle with General Welfare Presents. In this segment, I want to go through the spectacular situation that exists with respect to the cliffhanging abyss that now exists between the two different systems. One is the Wall Street London financial system, the other is the Belt and Road system. One is based on predatory financial speculation and predatory exploitation of cheap labor. And the other is based on alleviating poverty by creating the infrastructure to develop these areas so that they don't have to be relegated to their existence in a cul-de-sac of cheap labor. So one system wants to eliminate poverty through infrastructure development, real industrial development. The other system wants to perpetuate that system and exploit the cheap labor. And what they did is they created the United States as the consumer of last resort, gutting the United States industrial base, but using the United States as the consumer of last resort for the products that are made in sweatshops. For instance, Mexico, 80% of Mexico's exports to the United States, that Donald Trump is now starting to put the tariffs on 5% a month. 80% of these goods are actually produced near the border in what are called maquiladoras, or manufacturing centers, which are really more like sweatshops. I mean, they're really not very good places to work, and this is where 80% of it is coming in. So they're basically bringing in finishing things, assembly, different types of things. And what's going to happen is that the tariffs are going to go up on these things. But 80% is what Mexico is producing. 80% of their exports to the United States. And no Mexicans don't own these factories. These are owned by international cartels, international companies. Americans own them, not the Mexicans. So Trump is going to be taxing the imports of American companies and other companies into the United States. Same with China to some degree. Now, this doesn't resolve the problem. This merely creates the tension. Now, in the discussions initially between the Trump administration and China, they were heading towards some idea of a trade deal that would actually work to help the United States develop and help China. But the entire establishment of the United States, and what I mean by the entire establishment of the United States, I mean the entire establishment of Washington, Wall Street, the think tanks, they are totally freaked out because they see China becoming the dominant economic power in the world. Well, hell yes, they have 1.4 billion people. The United States only has 300 plus billion people. If China fully develops, they're going to be 4 times economically the size of the United States. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. As long as the United States is developing, it's well. As long as the United States is improving, that's the good part. But from the geopolitical standpoint of empire, of being able to plunder the world, of being able to sustain this offshore financial system, of being able to sustain the speculation, they don't like that. They don't like that. That's not the world that they want to live in. And that's the entirety of the U.S. establishment. Okay, you have to understand that. That's the entirety of the U.S. establishment. So you have this massive friction between the establishment of the United States the Republicans and the Democrats. They are unified. From Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer, all the way over to Ted Cruz and what's his name, little Marco Rubio. They are united in their opposition, including all of Fox TV. They're united in their opposition. China's the enemy. China's the enemy. China's the enemy. We must stop China. It went so far as Pompeo saying that the Chinese have to come up with the full actual figures of the Tiananmen Square massacre from 30 years ago, demanding that China, account for itself for something that happened 30 years ago. And the Chinese are looking at this and going, man, what the hell is wrong here? Can't you guys see? We want win-win. We want global development. We want the United States to prosper. What's wrong with having the United States prosper? What's wrong with you guys? Now, Donald Trump probably understands that. I'm sure he does. But everybody else is against it. So what's going to happen? Now, let me tell you how this situation is working out. Failure to have a decent trade agreement with China, which also means a failure to have any trade agreement with China, because what they're demanding that China do is carry out structural reforms in the financial system that will allow them to be looted by the international banking system. The Chinese are saying no. And I saw Steve Bannon on an interview saying that Liu He, the negotiator, he's a great guy, he's a reformer, but he agreed, but nobody, but the radicals and run the Communist Party of China against what? Baloney. They're asking China to change its entire legal system. And if they don't do it like snappity snap, then there's no trade agreement. Well, of course there's no trade agreement. So this is eyeball to eyeball. Wall Street is telling the Chinese, you either succumb or we're going to blow everything up. And the Chinese are saying, yeah, go ahead and blow everything up and see who comes out on top. And the Chinese are already working with Russia, preparing for Russia to provide much of the food that the United States and Canada is providing. China is setting up their own internal system, their own payment system. China is developing a chip manufacturing, so they're independent in chip manufacturing. They have the rare earth metals. China is huge. And with India coming into the scene with a more stable government, who's going to win in the showdown in the end when everything blows up? If it blows up. It ain't going to be Wall Street. It ain't going to be the U.S. population. It isn't going to be the European population. And China has the political infrastructure to deal with a collapse of that type, where they can keep their population organized. They can make sure everybody's fed. They can make sure everything works. What happens here when you can't get your money out of your bank account? Who's going to trust the government here? Does anybody trust the government anymore? I don't know. Who's going to go out there and say, okay, we're now going into an emergency police state in order to deal with this financial crisis? How many people are going to say, okay, yeah, we understand there's an emergency financial crisis, and yeah, we need to get in line and work with the government to make sure that food gets delivered and all of that? I don't know. That's a very scary thought. But what do you think happens when a financial system collapses, when it goes absolutely systemic into a systemic collapse? I mean, everything is done. All the central banks are linked together. They have these massive computer arrangements to prevent the collapse. You know, they have the bail-in prepared. They have the Financial Stability Board, which is, you know, a new IMF-type institution that's been in existence since 2009, trying to keep everything from blowing up. But what happens when China cuts off trade to the United States cuts off trade to China, Europe has to decide which side they're on. What do you think happens? We go into trading blocks. Who do you think is going to come out on top of that? It's insane. But the establishment of the United States, the establishment of Britain, which is the same, the establishment that created the European Union, they're insane. They do not want to see a world where China and India become major industrially developed countries, where Africa becomes industrially developed. They don't want to see any of that. They would rather blow it up. Well, they can blow it up. And that's where we're headed to. And Donald Trump wants a decent deal with China, but he can't get it through the establishment of the United States. The establishment of the United States will not allow it. And he's got everybody in his cabinet screaming, China, 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 China. And then you have Trump saying, I have a very profound friend in Xi Jinping. You know, I mean, you couldn't get two more discordant messages. And then Trump says, I'm looking forward to meeting with Putin and Xi Jinping. Where? At the G-20 summit in Osaka, Japan. And that's when the 20 major nations economically of the world will be sitting down. Not the G7, which has become irrelevant. The G20 includes those key countries which are not in the G7. It includes China. It includes India. India is not in the G7. Russia is not in the G7. Those three countries are not in the G7. This is the G20. Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, Argentina, Turkey, and there's other countries as well. And guess what, folks? That's where the showdown comes down. That's where the showdown is going to be. It's going to be at the Osaka G20 meeting, the 28th and 29th of June. And that's where we're headed right now, into that. And in the meantime, there's a meeting going on now in St. Petersburg. It's the economic forum that occurs every year. And the guest of honor is Xi Jinping. And the Russians and the Chinese are moving together to deal with what could very well be a global systemic break of the world into two camps. And where countries have to decide which camp they're in. And that's not going to be pleasant. That could lead to world war. That could lead to nuclear war. So that's where we are. The alternative is Lyndon LaRouche's economic plan for a new global financial architecture, which has been labeled the New Bretton Woods. And those countries, especially the United States, Russia, and China, can sit down and work that out. They can work it out. They can say, okay, we have a problem. This is the new way we're going to do business. Okay? And that's what's on the table potentially in this crisis. And not to do something like that, not to move in that direction, which all hinges on a trade agreement between China and the United States. That is the center of world politics right now. That is the center of economic future of the world, is this issue. On the one hand, you have the Belt and Road. Now, China did most of this in the last 10, 11 years. Their response to the 2008 financial crisis was to go in the direction of mass railway construction, and then 5 years after that, 3 years, 5 years after that, the announcement of the Belt and Road, and 6 years after that, the Belt and Road is growing all over the world. And this is going to be the showdown of the biggest showdown in world history. Will the West recognize, will the people who are in the West, who are in leading positions in the West, who are in the banks, in the institutions, finally wake up and realize they have one option for survival, and that is to work with the new paradigm of Lyndon LaRouche, which is reflected in China's Belt and Road. If they do that, folks, you and I and everybody have a future. If the elite decide and succeed and crushing that potential, crushing that ability to bring the United States and China together. So it's a showdown. Who's going to blink? The Chinese aren't going to blink. The Chinese don't bluff. So it's whether the West blinks or not. And if the West blinks, then we have some hope. If they don't blink, then we're headed towards hell. And the population of the United States is not necessarily going to blame China. They'll try to get the United States population to blame China, but they're not necessarily going to blame China. They're going to blame the establishment. They're going to blame, and that's already going on. That's been going on. That's why Trump got elected. Okay. And now we come to what's happened in Europe, which is incredible. You had the Brexit Party. So you have that whole situation. I do not have a reading on Trump's visit and what happened there and what that was all about. All I know is that he's talking to, it's in the media, he's talking about a post-Brexit deal with Great Britain. That's all I know. In Italy, the Lega Nord came in first and for the European Parliament, and they represent a commitment to the Belt and Road and a commitment to the reindustrialization of Italy. And their coalition partner, Five Star, man, they got more kooks in there than anywhere else in the universe. I mean, they got everybody from anti-vaccination to anti-development to anti-nuclear to green to whatever, and there's an uneasiness in that situation. In Germany, the Social Democratic Party collapsed, the CDU lost, and the Greens dominated. They're now the second largest party coming out of the European elections. And let me tell you something. Germany is, I won't say the word, really, they are. The Greens are going to take Germany down. They're going to do a plan of deindustrializing Germany, the fourth largest industrial power in the world. This is insanity. And you have to ask yourself, what is wrong with the German population? Well, after the war, they got mentally raped by the British into this collective guilt. That somehow there was something in their character that was responsible for the creation of Adolf Hitler. The truth is, Adolf Hitler was imposed from the outside by the international bankers on Germany. But instead of recognizing that reality, that Germany was an economically occupied country after World War I, and this was imposed upon them, and it was resisted to a large degree by forces in Germany. Nonetheless, this is being blamed on the character of the German people, the culture and the character of the German people. And so what happened is the Germans have this guilt complex, and any person that asserts the truth that goes against the consensus is, squashed. It's squashed. Because if you don't agree with the consensus, you're like Adolf Hitler, or you're like, you don't go along, or you're this, or you're that. And so they have the worst case of this in Germany. They try to do this here. Oh, you don't agree with the consensus. Well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you don't agree with carbon dioxide and etc. Well, you're a terrorist. It doesn't work here. Donald Trump got up and said, the global warming thing and the carbon dioxide thing is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated. As big as, if not bigger than the hoax of Russiagate. He said that publicly. He gets away with that. You can't do that in Germany. You don't get away with it in Germany by saying that. And that's the difference between the United States and Germany. So that's the situation. In France, it's kind of wild. The Macron party did slightly less than Marine Le Pen's party. So it's a very crazy situation. The European Union is disintegrating. The world's hope is the new paradigm. Most European nations know that they have no hope except to connect with the massive growth that's going on internationally with the help with the Belt and Road, and a lot of European countries are doing that. And so you have this elite imperial racist. These people are racist. Schumer is a racist. Nancy Pelosi is a racist. All these people, Republicans and Democrats alike, are fundamentally racist. They don't want the Chinese to become economically powerful. What else is that? Racist. Okay, that's racism. Okay, the Greens don't want China to become economically powerful. The Democrats don't want China to become economically powerful. The Republicans don't want China to become economically powerful. And only a nuclear war can prevent that. But there are consequences of going to nuclear war to stop China, because Russia is going to defend China. And China is developing the military capability of defending themselves. So that creates a situation in which nuclear war is not really an option that will work. But it is being considered. It has been considered. It has been being considered. It was the policy of the Bush administration. It was the policy of the Obama administration. It was called prompt global strike. It was this whole idea of developing the technology, the information technology, that'll give you real-time capability to knock out their command capabilities so that you can win a nuclear war. Now, here's where there's a huge problem. There's a huge problem with the U.S. population. There's a huge problem with the Chinese population on this, and the Japanese and the South Korean populations. On all of these populations have a huge problem with this. This is very fundamental. The belief that the IT, information technology, the continuing information technology revolution, and robotics is the wave of the future. It's the solution. It's how we're going to solve our problems. No. It creates an illusion that you can solve problems, like nuking China can solve a problem. Or somehow, by developing this IT technology, you can become superior militarily. Or by developing this technology, you can keep the financial system afloat because you can create these very complex systems to keep the whole financial system afloat using supercomputers, increasing supercomputers. That's how this whole derivative system, which is at the center of the world financial system, works. It's through information, increasing information processing. But information processing is not production. The development of the productive skills of the workforce is not the development of the increasing capacity to code. The techies. You go down to Westlake, here in Seattle, the techies, the Amazon workers, the grunts in the tech industry. They're skilled at working with computers, but they're not the productive part of the economy. Developing fusion power will change your economy. Developing advanced nuclear energy will change your economy. Developing space, going into space and making the scientific breakthroughs will change your economy. Building the infrastructure to develop the world changes your economy. Upgrading the productive skills of the workforce will change the economy. But information technology does not, by itself, is a solution. And if you start to believe that, then you start to become disconnected in your mind between what actually is the physical basis for the existence of society. You get disconnected from that. Not only are the Greens disconnected from that, but the people who get sucked into this whole IT, robotics, and information technology revolution, they're also being sucked into forgetting and not understanding where your food comes from, where everything comes from. It comes from real economic activity, which is not information processing. So these are the pitfalls that you have. You have people living in this imaginary world of environmentalism, which is an imaginary world of IT. And they're projecting this out on the real world, and it has no relationship to the actual reality. And this has caused a tremendous split in the population, where you have the people that live in these Silicon Valley type areas like Seattle and the Bay Area and different areas where they subscribe to a culture that is disconnected from the physical reality. And this has a lot to do with the problems that we have, and will have a lot to do with the problem that you have in the U.S. population. So as we go into this G20 meeting, it's going to be decisive how this trade agreement between China and Russia is going to between China and the United States is going to come into being. How it will come into being is going to be key, or not.